Hi there, my name is Rebekah Zabarsky, and you're watching the Global TV Demand Awards Virtual Festival, where we're celebrating the people behind the world's most popular TV shows. I have the pleasure to be sitting here today with Bryan Fuller, the creator and showrunner of Hannibal, which is one of the top 3 horror shows of 2020. Hello, Bryan, and congratulations.
Thank you. Hello. What a nice surprise.
So first of all, let's talk about the show you created that currently has over 27 times the demand of the average TV show.
Wow.
If you were to talk with somebody who's not familiar with the story, what would you say the Hannibal TV show is about?
You know, it sounds so corny to say, but really it's a love story. And it's a, but the genre is horror. So the love story is perverse and skewed and unhealthy and not recommended for, the viewing audience to practice in reality. But what drew me to the story initially was telling a love story between 2 men that was not necessarily about sex, but was about mutual understanding. And that felt like something that we could explore more of today. I think I was just reading something earlier today about the muscle that men need to flex now is telling their male friends that they love each other, and that expression is healthy. And not in Hannibal. It's not a healthy expression on our show, but that was the impetus of telling the story, was exploring what love was between 2 men, and then allowing the horror elements of that vulnerability and that intimacy to kind of take over psychologically. Mm-hmm. So it is about a cannibal psychiatrist who is metaphorically devouring the psychology of one of his patients.
Creepy.
Yes, it's very creepy.
A creepy love story.
Yes, those are the best kind. Like if it's a walk in the park, we'll stick to Barbara Streisand and Robert Redford. But right. This is something else altogether.
Right. And so Hannibal has actually had a bit of a second life after its debut on Netflix in June of last year in 2020. And we saw that this opened up a whole new global audience. And so I wanted to share with you some of the markets that expressed the most demand for the show over the full year last year. And I want to know if any of these surprise you. So after the US, Hannibal was most popular with audiences in Russia, France, Australia, India, Brazil, and Saudi Arabia. Do any of those countries surprise you?
It's interesting, the activity of the fan base, the Fannibal core fan base. I've always known as multinational, and that they're so. The common ground, I think, between the people who fetishize the show and really want to take a deep dive into its themes and the cinema of it are people who find themselves othered in some way in their communities. That's the hardcore fan base, are people who identify with being the other. And I feel like that is not bound by any sort of national boundaries of identity. So I'm not really surprised about the multicultural nature of those who are watching, because I see it with the fan base, and I try to be fairly active on Twitter with people who are still watching the show and rewatching the show and keeping it kind of part of the pop culture conversation. I'm very grateful to them, and it's not often that a show goes off the air and has been off the air for 5 years, that plus 5 years, more like 6 years, I think, going on, and yet has an immediacy with with those who are watching that feels as if it were airing for the first time. So I'm glad that it's multinational, and I also think that speaks to the power of Mads Mikkelsen as an international movie star. And also Hugh Dancy and Gillian Anderson and Lawrence Fishburne. These are all fantastic actors who have, you know, international appeal. So as much as, you know, I would be foolish to take any sort of credit for the appeal of the cast members, because I do feel like that is what is really keeping Hannibal alive, is the accessibility and the you know, the caliber of actors that we have on the show.
Mm-hmm. That reminds me of something that we measure at Parrot. When we think about the travelability of a show, which is what I was talking about, where else in the world is a show popular outside of its home market? You know, we can see that list of a wide variety of countries, and like, you know, the idea of an audience connecting with a show, but having that thread of the other being the connecting thread. It's really one factor of Hannibal that I think really puts it at the top of the charts that we saw this past year and continues. And since you brought up the Fannibals, I have to ask you a little bit more about that. So
please, I love them.
Good, that's right. I have seen your interaction with them online. So the Fannibals have been called TV's most dedicated fandom. And the show seems to collect a variety of very creative and very dedicated fans. Can you tell us any specific stories that you have about any kind of fan encounters over the years? Maybe something that's been really touching or surprising. I'd just like to hear an example of maybe one of your favorite moments that you've had when interacting with the fandom.
Well, you know, every year before the pandemic, there was Dragon Con, a convention in London that was a gathering, the Red Dragon Con for, you know, the Great Red Dragon. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I loved about going to that convention was you have private time with a table full of Fannibals, and you sit down and you have personal conversations about what they like and what you like, and because I feel like-minded with these folks, and I don't necessarily feel like I am, you know, the creator of the show as much as I am a fellow fan of these characters and this type of storytelling. So it does feel like it's my version of fan fiction for what Thomas Harris created. So on that level, we're very similar, and we're peers in many ways. One of the things that I loved about meeting a lot of these folks is that there's a lot of representation from the LGBTQ community. Mm-hmm. And one of the letters that gets very little play in talking about queerness is asexuals. And a lot of my favorite conversations have been with asexuals at the convention, who talk about how the love between Hannibal and Will, since it is not sexual on camera that we've witnessed, that there is something about having that level of intimacy without the challenges for them individually with sex and sexuality and sexual expression. That's kind of removed from the equation, and they see themselves wanting that level of intimacy with someone without the not necessarily the threat of sexuality or the expression of sexuality, but I suppose the stress of sexual expression. So I found the A in asexuality to be a really interesting place to start conversations with folks whose agenda isn't about, you know, getting laid. Their agenda is about being loved and loving, and how we are able to speak about those themes outside of kind of a traditional romantic narrative, and hearing how the the community of Hannibals and the acceptance of Hannibals, both self-acceptance and acceptance of others, has really given them something to enjoy in their lives. And I see, and I sit at these tables with people who come from all different walks of life, and they're all friendly and they all love each other and enjoy each other. And it's not just about the Hannibal experience as much as it is the experience of sharing something that you love with like-minded folks. And I find that the element that is not often talked about with fandom is the medicinal quality of what a community like that provides for individuals who may not have a connection with their family, may not have a connection with a strong friend base or community in their non-fandom lives, and have found all of those things within a fandom. And we forget that when we go to entertainment, we are going to entertainment for a variety of reasons, to be entertained, but also to escape, and to escape stressors and to escape things that may be unpleasant in our lives. And you look at the Star Wars fandom and the Marvel fandom and the Harry Potter fandom, and they are all providing places where individuals can go and find acceptance that they may not be able to find in their personal lives. And I find that to be part of that, and to have conversations with people and to recognize people. And, like Hannibal and Will have said to each other, you're like, I see you. Like, there's something, as, an Avatar, which is this, big, broad science fiction epic. There's something very beautiful at the heart of that the characters would say, I see you. That was like the highest form of praise or friendship, was just to say that I see you. And I feel like with the fan experience and the Hannibal experience on this show is a lot of people who feel unseen in their lives finally being able to get some sort of recognition or mirroring of identity that doesn't come with all of the peer pressures and vulnerabilities that social interaction can be for people who feel othered in their lives.
Mm-hmm. I mean, what you're saying is like fandom as medicine, really.
I sincerely believe it is medicine. I mean, you can see from my office, I am a pop culture aficionado. I love horror movies, and I've got, a lot of things from pop culture because they were medicinal for me growing up. The Shining was oddly medicinal. I grew up in a very abusive home, so I found a kind of peace or recognition in Danny Torrance, a special little kid who's literally running for his life from his father. Like, that's something that I related to. And so I imagine extrapolating from my own experience that this is not an uncommon thing for people to want to go to a place where Luke Skywalker can come in at the end of the episode and save the day because he's good. And I feel like now, particularly in the, ending the last 4 years of an abusive relationship with American leadership, I feel like we are all looking for places to heal, and the most common place to find that is a screen. And yes, that is sometimes abused, but more often than not, it is something that should be cherished and should be respected on an individual level of what it provides to people who are seeking out an escape from whatever is going on in their heads or their personal lives.
Absolutely. I have a question that was actually submitted by a self-proclaimed Hannibal.
Yay!
And when you talk about the escape, this sort of ties right into that. So this was from Erin at Flying Mollusk Studios. She said, a hallmark of much of your work is a rich, surreal visual style and overall emotional tone. Where do you find creative inspiration to evoke such unique and memorable moments and scenes?
Everywhere, honestly. I think that there's every to be cynical, in terms of the of what we label these things, every content provider is providing a buffet that they have dined at over their entire lives and digested and processed and then created, regurgitated, we'll keep it at regurgitated, in a way that speaks to people who also like those things, but they're spun in a way that kind of keeps the medium evolving, in a way that is electric and exciting. That I go to a movie and I sort of see the ingredients list of like, oh, I see your influences, and you yes anded all of them and raised those games that inspired you into something that is uniquely yours in some way. And that feels like that's the process of art. And we are kind of cycling through different expressions of art as artists that is constantly fueled from everything that we've experienced, whether it's on a screen or in life. Everything it can be retconned to find a human experience in some way. So I feel like there's something to in my work in seeking romantic relationships that don't necessarily hinge on sexual expression, is something that comes from being a gay man whose testicles dropped in the middle of the AIDS crisis, and therefore sex and sexuality were dangerous expressions, and there was always a scythe or a sort of Damocles hanging over any sort of romance, because it was right when it was happening. So I can see how, like, oh, I was really informed by going through puberty during the AIDS crisis and feeling like, oh shit, like having sex is deadly. And I think there's a whole generation of queer people who have a strange layer on top of their sexual selves as a result of going through something that was about seeing everybody in your peer group, or a lot of people in your peer group, die for something that is a given right as a human expression. So I feel like that informs a lot of stuff. It certainly informed Pushing Daisies. It informs the romance in Hannibal. And there's something about looking at my work in that way and sort of being able to retcon, like, oh, that is that, like, here's where that came from. Here's the DNA strand that that I was accessing when telling those stories.
One question following off of that, then, for the content creators who are interested in making TV for networks or studios and who want to make, big budget TV and make something as beautiful and luscious as Hannibal is, what advice would you give a creator now who wants their storytelling to really stand out?
Well, I feel like it is about honoring your place as the audience member. And I think if you're basically making content for somebody else, then you have this hurdle that takes you outside of yourself and outside of your authenticity to try to anticipate what somebody else wants from you. And it's something that you shouldn't do in relationships, and that you shouldn't do in your artistic expressions, that you should consider yourself the first member of the audience, and you are providing content for what you want to see. And then you will find like-minded folks who share those sensibilities and share that interest. And I feel like where things go wrong for me as an audience member is when I feel like somebody is not speaking with any sort of authenticity, and they're not earning character moments in a way that feel lived in. And the best notes that I like to have, you know, whenever anybody says like, oh, this scene feels lived in for whatever reason, I'm like, oh, I'm doing my job as an artist. I'm representing a reality that is accessible to someone else, and I'm giving them an invitation to leave their world. And I feel like that's what is the duty and responsibility for anybody who wants to tell a story, is to tell your story authentically and to find a way to keep true to that, because that has to be your guiding light in many ways, because there's no controlling what people want. And yes, you can, you know, cultivate and manicure a sensibility, but if it doesn't speak to you directly, then you're kind of posing. And that's certainly, there are a lot of people who provide content who've had great success at posing, and I don't have that calibration in my instincts, you know. And I feel like what has always done right by me is knowing what it feels right and feels right for a story. So I feel like for people who are wanting to craft their own individual stories, what's so great now with people having cameras on their phones and, you know, editing systems on their phones, is that where there's a will, there's a way. And tenacity, if you haven't made tenacity your friend, make tenacity your friend, because if it's not worth it for you to keep trying, then it's not worth it for the audience to find your entertainment or your art. So I feel like the best advice for anybody who's thinking about telling stories is to tell the story. Find a way to tell it. And TikTok is a great platform for that. We see networks discovering TikTok artists because they find something accessible or authentic in what they're expressing. So TikTok is a perfect platform to start building your muscles for storytelling. And that's something that I feel like, you know, my first job was on Star Trek in the 90s, and I felt like I was going to school. There was so many things that I was learning just by being in the room with people who were smarter than me, who knew when to zig or when to zag in terms of a narrative. And then it is that kind of, you know, 10,000 hours of experience before you finally get a handle on what your own expression is, and you get the, you know, the wax on and the wax off of storytelling, starting with those rudimentary kind of, you know, narrative building exercises are really, really helpful. And also I found improvisation classes to be incredibly helpful for storytelling. You know, between the Star Trek writers' room with all of these fantastic minds that had, you know, a skill set with high concept storytelling that I did not possess, I was able to leach out a skill set from them. But also taking groundlings classes in my early 20s, I learned more about character writing and crafting specific, bold, strong choices with your narratives and your characters from improvisation classes, and being able to, you know, exercise principles as simple as the yes and angle of storytelling. If, you know, a man walks into the room, yes, and he orders a drink, yes, and that drink has poison in it. You know, there's you know, those simple skill sets are wonderful muscles to build up. So anybody who's thinking about telling stories, I highly recommend an improvisational storytelling or, you know, acting class. Like I'm not an actor, but I got a lot out of how to craft a character from an actor's point of view versus a writer's point of view that help with just specificity, which is something that I look for in other people's writing, and certainly in anything that's entertaining. I love specific choices. I love big, funny, specific choices. I'm watching Search Party right now. Mm-hmm. And I love this show because every season they completely reconfigure it, and it is, you know, about all of these shallow, monstrous characters that we're finding this strange accessibility with because of the specificity of their character expressions. Whether we are those types of people or not, we can probably identify with something that is so specific it becomes relatable. So that's why I would recommend seeking out, you know, those kind of storytelling classes. Because also what's great about, you know, a groundlings course or an improvisational course is that it focuses on small bites of storytelling, where it's like this sketch, you know, you're telling a story in a matter of minutes, a la Quibi or TikTok, but you're having to make the biggest, boldest choices in that time because you only have so much real estate to tell your story. So it forces you to make better choices and not waste an audience's time with something that could be inferred with a much simpler expression.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I've got one more question for you, and I'm going to bring it back to our main character of Hannibal. What is the distinct characteristic about him that you think is the most relatable to audiences?
I feel like the most distinctive aspect of Hannibal's character is his appreciation of beauty. And I feel like we all have different levels of understanding of beauty and expressions of beauty. And one of the things that I loved so much about making that show was the collaboration with the actors. And because I'm thinking about these characters from a writer's point of view, and they're thinking about it from an actor's point of view. And they so often, Hugh, Maz, Gillian, Lawrence, Caroline, they all brought something to the table that was unexpected to me, and yet it excited me, inspired me, and then I wove it into the weave of the show. But Maz was somebody who understood Hannibal in a fundamental way, which was, you know, his love for Will Graham is a love of beauty and an appreciation of beauty. And that's what he's responding to. And anything that flies in the face of beauty is rude, and you eat the rude. Like, that's, you know, so there's also this kind of queer sense of satisfying revenge, you know, societally speaking, that those who are rude are the ones that are on Hannibal's menu. And if you're a pig of a human being, you deserve to be somebody's bacon. And that's kind of satisfying. I know it's satisfying for me, particularly given the last 4 years of American leadership, where I felt like a lot of people deserve to be on a plate as opposed to in a seat of power. And so I think that sort of fantasy, whether you're extrapolating it like from Carrie at the prom, where you're rooting for Carrie, but everybody at that prom had it coming in some way. So there's that satisfying aspect of a villain who does recognize the beauty in the world and does cultivate it and appreciate it and put it on a pedestal. And if anybody is so disrespectful to shit on beauty in any way, shape, or form, well, they get what's coming to that. So that's satisfying in a you know, as you know, growing up a little queer boy and feeling oppressed and feeling othered and feeling, you know, not a sense of not belonging in any way, shape, or form. It's nice to see a villain where you feel like, oh, I'm not under direct threat from Hannibal because I'm a relatively good person and I try not to be rude. And yet I can appreciate all the things that he appreciates and take some satisfaction when he eats somebody who deserves it.
Bon appetit.
Bon appetit, exactly.
Bryan, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you. Congratulations on the continued success of Hannibal, and on behalf of Pear Analytics, we wish you the best. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to the Fannibals who keep watching and keeping us in the conversation. I wouldn't be sitting here if it weren't for the Fannibals.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.